I never thought my own father would betray me so completely. After 12 years of building Mason family construction into a regional powerhouse, he called me into his office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Conrad, Jake is coming back. I need you to train him to take over the company." Just like that, my decade of sacrifice was worthless. When I refused this humiliating request, Dad leaned back in his chair and said, "If you have a problem with my decision, there's the door." So, I walked. I had no idea that within 7 days, the entire company would implode spectacularly, taking with it everything my father had spent 40 years building. The day I joined Mason Family Construction, I was 23, fresh out of college with a business degree and big dreams. Dad had started the company before I was born, building it from a 2-man operation to a respectable local contractor with 20 employees. When I came on board in the summer of 2011, I saw potential for so much more. I started at the bottom, literally in the trenches. Dad insisted I learn every aspect of the business from the ground up. While other business graduates were sitting in air-conditioned offices, I was hauling lumber, mixing concrete, and learning how to read blueprints alongside our crew. 6 months of hard physical labor before I was allowed anywhere near the office. "You can't manage what you don't understand," Dad would say, his calloused hands resting on my shoulder. In those early days, I admired his wisdom and work ethic. Frank Mason was respected in the industry for his honesty and craftsmanship. I wanted to be just like him. By the time I moved into the office, I knew every employee by name, understood their strengths and struggles, and had earned their respect the hard way. I worked alongside our project managers for 2 years, learning bidding, scheduling, and client relations. Only then did Dad let me handle my first solo project, a small dental office renovation. My brother Jake was 17 when I joined the company. While I spent weekends poring over contracts and building codes, Jake was out with friends, playing football, and enjoying a carefree high school life. Dad never expected the same level of commitment from him. "Let the boy have his fun," he'd say whenever Mom suggested Jake help out during summer breaks. Jake went off to college in California, while I slowly transformed our company. I introduced modern project management software, created a website, and started bidding on larger commercial projects. Dad was skeptical at first, especially when I suggested taking out a loan to expand our equipment fleet. "Debt is dangerous in construction," he warned. But when we landed our first government contract to renovate the county courthouse, he had to admit my strategy was working. That project put Mason Construction on the map. Our workforce grew to 50 employees, then 75. Our annual revenue tripled within 4 years. All the while, Jake was enjoying college life, posting photos from beach parties and football games. After graduation with a general business degree, he spent 2 years finding himself while traveling through Europe and Asia. Occasionally, he'd call home during family dinners, and Dad would put him on speakerphone, beaming with pride as Jake described his adventures. Not once did anyone suggest Jake should join the family business. Meanwhile, I worked 60-hour weeks, sacrificed relationships, and postponed starting my own family. The company became my life. I knew every client, supplier, and employee. I handled crises, navigated economic downturns, and steadily built our reputation. By my 35th birthday, we had 120 employees and contracts across 3 states. The crown jewel was the St. Mary's Hospital renovation project I secured last year, a $30 million contract that would essentially double our annual revenue. I spent 6 months developing that bid, meeting with hospital administrators, architects, and medical equipment specialists. When we won the contract over national competitors, it was the proudest moment of my career. Dad seemed proud too, taking me out for an expensive steak dinner to celebrate. "You've done well, son," he said, raising his glass. "Better than I ever expected." I thought that was his way of acknowledging that I would eventually take over the company. We'd never discussed succession explicitly, but it seemed the natural order of things. I was effectively running most operations already, with Dad serving more as the public face of the company while gradually reducing his day-to-day involvement. Then came that family dinner 3 weeks ago. Mom had prepared Dad's favorite pot roast. I assumed we were gathering to discuss the hospital project, which was scheduled to break ground next month. Instead, Dad cleared his throat after dessert and dropped the bomb. "Jake is coming home next week," he announced, smiling broadly. "He's finished his MBA, and he's ready to join the business." I nodded, surprised but not immediately concerned. "That's great. We could use some help in marketing, or maybe have him learn project management." Dad shook his head. "No, Conrad. Jake is coming in as executive vice president, with the understanding that he'll take over as CEO when I retire next year." The shock must have shown on my face because Mom quickly looked down at her plate. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "What about me?" I finally managed to ask. Dad waved his hand dismissively. "You'll stay on as Chief Operations Officer, of course. You're good at the day-to-day stuff, but Jake has fresh ideas from business school. You're too traditional in your approach. We need innovation to compete with the big national firms." The injustice was breathtaking. Jake had never laid a brick, calculated a bid, or managed a single employee. He had no relationships with our clients. He didn't know the first thing about construction. Yet somehow, his MBA and fresh ideas qualified him to leap over me and take the position I had spent 12 years earning. "This is my company too," I said quietly. "I built it alongside you." Dad's expression hardened. "It's my name on the incorporation papers, Conrad. My company. My decision." I left that dinner questioning everything. Had I been doing something wrong all these years? Was I really too traditional despite growing the company exponentially? Or was this simply favoritism, plain and simple? What I didn't realize then was that the situation was far worse than simple favoritism. Dad wasn't just handing Jake an unearned position. He was handing him the power to destroy everything we had built. The following Monday morning, Dad called an all-hands meeting in our main warehouse. I arrived early, still hoping there might be some misunderstanding about his plans. Perhaps he had misspoken at dinner, or I had misinterpreted his meaning. But the moment I walked in and saw Jake standing beside Dad's makeshift podium, wearing a suit that probably cost more than our foreman made in a month, I knew the betrayal was real. Our employees filed in, many nodding respectfully to me, before taking their seats on folding chairs and stacked lumber. These were good people, skilled tradespeople, and dedicated office staff who had helped build this company. Many had been with us for years. They trusted me. We had weathered recessions and challenges together. Now they were about to learn that the future of their livelihoods was being handed to an untested, unknown entity. "Good morning, everyone," Dad began, beaming with pride. "Today is a special day for Mason Family Construction. I'd like to introduce my youngest son, Jake, who has just completed his MBA from Stanford. Jake will be joining us as Executive Vice President, and over the next year, he'll be learning the business with the intention of taking over as CEO when I retire." The warehouse fell silent. A few employees glanced my way, confusion evident on their faces. I maintained a neutral expression through sheer force of will. Jake stepped forward with a confidence that hadn't been earned. "Thanks, Dad. I'm really excited to join the family business and take it to the next level. I've got some incredible ideas for modernizing our operations and expanding into new markets." He proceeded to outline a vision that demonstrated his complete lack of understanding of our industry. He talked about disrupting the construction space and leveraging digital transformation without any specifics. He mentioned expansion into luxury home building, a notoriously high-risk sector we had deliberately avoided. He even suggested we could reduce overhead by replacing some of our skilled workers with subcontractors. I watched the faces of our longtime employees darken. Terry, our senior project manager who had been with the company for 20 years, crossed his arms and frowned. Sarah, our office manager, shot me a concerned look from across the room. When the meeting ended, employees approached me immediately. "Is this for real, Conrad?" Terry asked quietly. "This kid's going to be running the show?" "We'll see," I replied, not wanting to undermine Dad publicly but unable to endorse the plan. Sarah lingered until the others had dispersed. "Conrad, can we talk later?" she asked, her expression serious. I nodded, then headed toward Dad's office for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I found Dad and Jake reviewing company financials, something Jake should have had no access to yet. Both looked up when I entered. "Can we speak privately?" I asked Dad. Jake smirked. "Anything you need to say to Dad, you can say in front of me now. We're going to be working closely together." I stared at him for a moment, then turned to Dad. "Frank, I'd like to speak with you alone." "Now." Dad sighed, but nodded to Jake, who reluctantly left the office, closing the door behind him. "That was disrespectful, using my first name like that," Dad began. "Disrespectful?" I couldn't contain my anger any longer. "You just publicly undermined me in front of every employee we have. People who have worked with me for years. And you're concerned about what I called you? This is business, not personal, Conrad. How is bypassing your son who has given 12 years to this company not personal? Help me understand the business logic of putting someone with zero industry experience in charge." Dad leaned back in his chair. "It's always been my plan to have Jake take over. He's the youngest, but he's got the education and the vision." "The youngest?" I was incredulous. "This isn't the Middle Ages, Dad. We don't follow primogeniture in modern business." "Watch your tone," he warned. "This is still my company, a company I helped build. I brought in the hospital contract. I modernized our operations. I developed relationships with every major client we have." "You did your job," Dad said dismissively. "You followed the playbook I created. Jake will write a new one." The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. "What exactly do you want from me now? To train my replacement? To show Jake everything I've learned over 12 years so he can swoop in and take credit?" "That's exactly what I expect," Dad said firmly. "You'll train Jake in all aspects of the business. You know the details better than anyone. And if I refuse?" Dad's eyes hardened. "Then train your brother or walk. It's that simple. You'd throw away 12 years of my contribution? Risk the hospital project that I secured? You were just following orders all these years, Conrad. I could have trained anyone to do what you did." The words stung worse than any physical blow. Just following orders. As if I hadn't poured my heart and soul into growing this business. As if I hadn't sacrificed my personal life, relationships, and opportunities elsewhere to be loyal to my father and our family company. I stood up slowly, a strange calm settling over me. "I quit." Dad looked momentarily startled, then covered it with a scoff. "Don't be dramatic. Take the day off, cool down, and we'll talk tomorrow." "No, I'm done. Effective, immediately. Jake wants the business? He can have it. But I won't train him, and I won't stay to watch him destroy what we've built." I walked out of his office without waiting for a response. My mind was surprisingly clear as I went to my own office and began packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box. Family photos, industry awards, a few books, 12 years, reduced to a single container. Sarah appeared in my doorway, concern etched on her face. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "I'm leaving." She glanced over her shoulder to ensure no one was nearby, then stepped inside and closed the door. "Conrad, there's something you should know. I've been noticing some irregularities in the accounting recently." This caught my attention. "What kind of irregularities?" "Cash withdrawals authorized by your father, changes to vendor payment schedules. And last week, Jake was asking me about access to our operating accounts." She handed me a USB drive. I made copies of some of the records. Something doesn't add up. I slipped the drive into my pocket, thanking her with a nod. "Be careful, Sarah." As I carried my box through the office, Several employees stopped to watch. The news had spread quickly. A few nodded respectfully. Terry approached and shook my hand firmly. "This is a mistake," he said quietly. "We all know who really runs this place. Take care of yourself," I replied, "and keep me posted on how things go." As I loaded my box into my truck, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Loss and betrayal, certainly, but also an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't responsible for Mason family construction. Whatever happened next was on Jake and my father. The drive home was surreal. Without the constant pressure of work, I suddenly realized how much of myself I had sacrificed for the company. I had no serious relationship, few close friends outside of work, and virtually no hobbies. My identity had become completely wrapped up in being Conrad Mason from Mason Construction. Now, who was I? That evening, my phone rang constantly. Employees, clients, even suppliers who had heard the news. I ignored them all, needing time to process what had happened, until Jake's name appeared on my screen just after 10 p.m. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey, bro," Jake said, his tone casual as if nothing had happened. "I need the passwords for the project management system and the contact info for the hospital project team." No apology, no acknowledgement of the situation, just an entitled demand for the information he needed. "Figure it out yourself," I replied coldly. "Isn't that why you got the big promotion? Your fresh ideas and innovation? Don't be a jerk about this, Conrad. This is business." "Exactly. And now it's your business, not mine. Good luck." I hung up and blocked his number, along with my father's. Whatever crisis they were facing or would face in the coming days wasn't my problem anymore. At least, that's what I told myself as I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion. What I didn't realize then was that the company's problems had already begun long before I walked out, and my departure was about to accelerate its downfall in ways none of us could have imagined. The next few days passed in a blur. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. No crisis to solve, no employees depending on me. The sudden vacuum in my life was disorienting. I slept late, ignored my emails, and avoided thinking about the future. A part of me was still in shock, unable to process the complete dismissal of my contributions to the family business. By Thursday, my self-imposed isolation was interrupted by persistent knocking at my front door. I opened it to find Sarah, our office manager, standing on my porch with a grim expression. "You need to know what's happening," she said without preamble. "It's worse than I thought." I invited her in and listened as she detailed the chaos that had erupted at Mason Construction in just 3 days. Jake had immediately fired 2 senior project managers who had questioned his plans, replacing them with college friends who had 0 construction experience. He had also begun implementing a digital transformation strategy that involved scrapping our proven project management system for expensive new software that no one knew how to use. "But that's not the worst part," Sarah continued, pulling out a folder of documents. "Remember those financial irregularities I mentioned? I've been digging deeper." What Sarah revealed was stunning. Over the past 6 months, large sums of money had been transferred from company accounts to unknown recipients. The transfers were approved by my father, but initiated by Jake, who apparently had been given financial access long before his official return. "I found these too," she added, sliding across bank statements from an account I didn't recognize. "It's a separate LLC registered to Jake. The money trail leads there, then gets dispersed to various casinos in Atlantic City and Las Vegas." The realization hit like a thunderbolt. Jake has a gambling problem. Sarah nodded grimly. "A big one. Based on these transfers, he's lost at least $400,000 in the past year. Does Dad know? I think he knows something. He's been covering for Jake, moving money between accounts to hide the withdrawals. But I don't think he understands the full extent." I sat back, processing this information. It explained so much. Jake's extended finding himself period after college, his sudden interest in the family business, and Dad's inexplicable decision to put him in charge. "There's more," Sarah said hesitantly. "The St. Mary's Hospital contract, the one you secured, has specific language requiring your personal oversight as a condition. The client has been calling all week asking for you. When Jake finally took the call yesterday, he apparently told them that you were just a project manager and that he would be handling everything going forward." I winced. The hospital administrators were conservative, relationship-focused clients who had chosen Mason Construction largely because of the trust I had built with them over many meetings. How did they respond? "They've scheduled an emergency review of the contract for Monday. They're talking about invoking the key personnel clause to cancel if you're not involved." The implications were severe. The $30 million hospital project represented nearly half of the company's projected revenue for the next 2 years. Losing it would be devastating. As I was processing this, my phone buzzed with a text from Terry, one of our longtime project managers. "For your information, 3 subcontractors refused to work with Jake today. Checks are bouncing." "What the hell is going on?" I showed Sarah the message. She sighed. "Jake changed the payment schedules without understanding our cash flow. He's prioritizing payments to some vendor called Apex Consulting that no one has ever heard of." A quick search revealed that Apex Consulting was registered to a former college roommate of Jake's. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. My phone rang again. This time it was our banker, Bill Thompson, who had worked with Mason Construction for years. "Conrad, I'm calling as a courtesy," he began after I answered. "There's been unusual activity on the company accounts, and a request came in this morning to take out a high-interest line of credit using company equipment as collateral. Given our relationship, I wanted to check if you were aware of this." "I'm no longer with the company, Bill," I explained. "You should speak with my father. I've tried. He's not returning calls, and your brother doesn't seem to understand basic business finance. Conrad, what's happening over there?" I thanked him for the heads up without providing details, but the picture was becoming clearer by the hour. Jake wasn't just incompetent. He was actively using the company as his personal piggy bank while making disastrous business decisions. That evening, my mother showed up unannounced. She looked tired, with new worry lines around her eyes. "Your father would kill me if he knew I was here," she began, after settling on my couch. "But you deserve to know the truth. According to Mom, Dad had been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease last year. The doctor had recommended he reduce stress and begin planning for retirement. This health scare, combined with his 60th birthday, had triggered a family legacy panic. He always had this dream of Mason being a multi-generation company," she explained. "When he realized he needed to step back, he became fixated on having one of his sons take over. He had a son who was already running the company," I pointed out, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. Mom nodded sadly. "I know, but in his mind, you were always his soldier, Conrad, the loyal lieutenant. Jake was the son he imagined as a leader. Based on what evidence?" I couldn't help asking. "None," she admitted. "Just his outdated notions about birth order and personality. He sees himself in Jake's charisma and big ideas. He doesn't value the steady reliability that you provide." "Provided," I corrected. Past tense. She reached for my hand. "Frank made a terrible mistake. I told him so, but his pride won't let him admit it yet." "Has he told you about Jake's gambling?" I asked. The shock on her face answered before she could speak. "What gambling?" I explained what Sarah had discovered, watching my mother's expression shift from surprise to horror. "Frank said Jake had some financial troubles from bad investments," she whispered. "He never mentioned gambling. Mom, Jake has been stealing from the company, and now Dad has put him in charge of all of it." She stood up abruptly. "I need to talk to your father. This has gone too far." After she left, I spent the night reviewing the documents Sarah had provided. The more I dug, the worse it looked. Jake hadn't just been siphoning money for gambling. He had taken out personal loans using his future position at Mason Construction as leverage. Loans that would now come due. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. It turned out to be James Wilson, the St. Mary's Hospital Facilities Director and the main client contact for our big project. "Conrad, what the hell is happening at Mason Construction?" he demanded. "I met your brother yesterday, and frankly, I'm concerned." He knew nothing about our specific requirements, made promises that violate building codes, and then had the nerve to suggest we increase our budget by 20% for innovative approaches he couldn't actually explain. I chose my words carefully. "James, I'm no longer with Mason Construction. I can't speak to their current operations." "That's exactly the problem," James replied. "Our contract specifically requires your oversight. You were the reason we chose Mason over the national firms. I understand your concern. Conrad, I'll be blunt. We're prepared to cancel the contract on Monday unless you're personally involved. Your father isn't returning calls, and your brother is, frankly, a liability." The board is already nervous. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, torn between satisfaction that my value was being recognized and genuine concern for the employees who would suffer if the company failed. Despite everything, I didn't want to see decades of my father's work and my own destroyed. My phone rang again. This time it was a major supplier who hadn't been paid for 3 recent deliveries. Then, a project manager reporting that Jake had promised impossible completion dates to a client. Then a competitor tactfully inquiring if I might be interested in bringing my client relationships to their firm. The dam was breaking. And somewhere beneath the avalanche of calls was a realization. I could either watch from the sidelines as everything collapsed, or I could make strategic decisions about my own future. That night, as I was finally organizing my thoughts and considering my options, I received one more call from a loyal client offering me independent contract work to complete a project Mason Construction would likely be unable to finish. It was the first step toward what would become my new path forward. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after I had walked out of Mason Construction, the company's collapse began in earnest. I learned about it in fragments, through calls and texts from former colleagues who had stayed in touch despite the awkward circumstances. The St. Mary's Hospital Board had called an emergency meeting and officially terminated their contract with Mason Construction, citing the key personnel clause that required my involvement. The local business journal ran a story with the headline "Major Hospital Project in Jeopardy as Mason Construction Faces Leadership Crisis." By midday, 3 more clients had paused their projects pending review. Subcontractors, already wary because of delayed payments, began removing their equipment from job sites. The company's cash flow, which I had carefully managed for years, rapidly deteriorated as receivables dried up, while payroll and other obligations continued. Around 3 p.m., I received a panicked call from my mother. Dad had suffered what they initially feared was a heart attack while arguing with Jake at the office. He had been rushed to the hospital, though doctors later confirmed it was a severe anxiety attack that had mimicked heart attack symptoms. "He's asking for you," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Please, Conrad, whatever's happened between you two, he needs you now." Despite my lingering anger, I couldn't refuse. 2 hours later, I stood awkwardly in my father's hospital room, watching the monitors tracking his heart rate. He looked suddenly old and fragile against the white sheets. His usual commanding presence diminished. "The doctor says it wasn't a heart attack," Mom explained quietly, "but it was a warning. His blood pressure was dangerously high." Dad opened his eyes, focusing slowly on me. "Conrad," he said, his voice hoarse, "the company is in trouble?" I finished for him. "I know. Jake disappeared," he continued. "Took off this morning after the hospital canceled the contract, not answering his phone." I wasn't surprised. Jake had never faced significant consequences for his actions. When things got tough, he ran. "Dad, what did you expect? He has no experience, no relationships with clients or employees, and apparently a gambling problem you neglected to mention. Dad closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. I thought I could fix him, get him settled in a responsible position, help him grow up. By handing him a multi-million-dollar company? That's like giving a teenager the keys to a race car because you want him to learn to drive responsibly. I made a mistake, Dad admitted, perhaps for the first time in his life. Conrad, you need to come back, take over, fix this. The request was breathtaking in its arrogance. After dismissing my contributions, insulting my abilities, and replacing me with my unqualified brother, now Dad expected me to swoop in and save everything. It's not that simple, Dad. The damage is already substantial. The hospital contract is gone. Suppliers aren't delivering. Clients are panicking. But you can fix it, he insisted, reaching for my hand. You know the business better than anyone. I gently pulled away. Maybe, but I'm not sure I should. His expression hardened slightly, even in his weakened state. What does that mean? This is our family legacy, Conrad. A legacy you were willing to hand to Jake without a second thought. Maybe this is the natural consequence of that decision. You're punishing me by letting the company fail? His voice rose, causing a monitor to beep in warning. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied calmly. I'm letting your decision play out to its logical conclusion. You chose Jake. Now you and Jake need to solve the problems you've created. People will lose their jobs, he argued. People who have been loyal to us for years. That cut deep, because he was right. The employees didn't deserve to suffer for my father's poor judgment or Jake's irresponsibility. I'll help the employees find new positions, I said after a moment. I have contacts throughout the industry. But I won't come back to fix the company for you. Mom, who had been silent during our exchange, finally spoke up. Conrad, please reconsider. Your father has admitted he was wrong, has he? I turned back to Dad. Have you actually acknowledged that I was the right person to lead the company? That I earned that position through years of dedication and results? Or are you just desperate because your chosen successor has abandoned ship? Dad didn't answer directly. We need you, son. You need my skills and connections. That's different from valuing me as your successor. The conversation was interrupted by a doctor entering to check on Dad's condition. I stepped out into the hallway, where I found several text messages waiting on my phone. The situation at Mason Construction was deteriorating by the hour. Employees hadn't been paid for the previous week. A lien had been filed against the company for unpaid material costs. The office was in chaos. When I returned to the room, Dad was sitting up slightly, looking marginally better, but still frail. The company is filing for bankruptcy, he said flatly. The accountants say there's no choice. Jake apparently took out loans I didn't know about, using the business as collateral. I nodded, having already suspected as much from the documents Sarah had shared. What happens next? Chapter 11. Reorganization, probably. Sell off equipment to pay creditors. Lay off most of the staff. His voice broke on the last part. 40 years, Conrad. Gone in a week. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. My father had built something meaningful from nothing, employing hundreds of people over the decades, supporting his family, creating a solid reputation. To see it crumble so quickly was genuinely tragic. But I also recognized that this collapse wasn't simply bad luck or market forces. It was the direct result of poor decisions, favoritism, and a failure to properly value the people who had contributed to the company's success. I'm sorry it's ending this way, I said, and I meant it. But this isn't something I can or should fix for you. As I left the hospital, my phone rang again. It was Terry, sounding desperate. Conrad, we're all getting laid off tomorrow. No severance, nothing. 20 years I've given to this company, and this is how it ends. I made a decision in that moment. Send me the contact information for everyone being let go. I'll make some calls, see what I can do to help people land on their feet. What about you? What are you going to do? It was a question I'd been pondering all week. I'm figuring that out, but I won't leave you guys hanging. By that evening, I had compiled a list of every employee affected by the company's collapse. I spent the next 2 days calling competitors, suppliers, and clients, leveraging my reputation to help place as many people as possible in new positions. It was the right thing to do, regardless of my feelings toward my father and brother. Through this process, I began to see a path forward for myself as well. The skills and relationships I had developed over 12 years hadn't disappeared when I walked out of Mason Construction. They were assets I could build upon, independent of my father's company. The most surprising development came from James Wilson at St. Mary's Hospital. Having terminated their contract with Mason Construction, they were in a difficult position with a half-started project and millions in funding at risk. "Conrad," James said when he called, "we contracted with Mason Construction largely because of you. The board is wondering if you might consider taking on the project independently. We'd need to work out the details. But the key personnel was always you, not the company name." It was an unexpected opportunity born from the very crisis that had seemed like a career-ending disaster just days earlier. And it wouldn't be the last such opportunity to emerge from the rubble of Mason Construction. 2 weeks after walking out of Mason Family Construction, I found myself sitting in a rented office space, reviewing blueprints for the St. Mary's Hospital renovation project. James Wilson and the hospital board had moved quickly, eager to get the project back on track after terminating their contract with Mason Construction. They had offered me a direct contract as an independent construction manager, with the freedom to assemble my own team. My first calls had been to the most skilled and reliable people from Mason. Terry joined as project manager, bringing his 20 years of experience and sterling reputation. Sarah came on board to handle administration and finance, relieved to escape the chaos of the collapsing company. Within days, I had recruited 15 former colleagues who had been casualties of my father's poor decisions and Jake's mismanagement. Instead of purchasing equipment as my father had always insisted on, I negotiated favorable rental terms with a national supplier. "No debt," I told Sarah, as we worked out our business model. "We grow sustainably, based on secured contracts, not speculation." We set up shop as Cornerstone Construction Management, a name that reflected my philosophy about building on solid foundations. The St. Mary's project would be our proving ground, a high-profile opportunity to demonstrate that the expertise behind Mason Construction's previous success had transitioned to a new, more stable home. Word spread quickly throughout the industry. Former clients began reaching out, concerned about projects left in limbo by Mason's collapse. I was careful not to directly poach business, but when clients independently sought us out, we were ready to help. Meanwhile, Mason Construction's bankruptcy proceedings moved forward. Equipment was liquidated to pay creditors. The building that had housed the company for 30 years was put up for sale. My father, released from the hospital but still shaken, faced the humiliating process of dismantling what had been his life's work. I had maintained my distance, focusing on building my new venture rather than dwelling on the past. But the situation changed when my mother appeared at my office one afternoon, looking exhausted and worried. "They're going to take the house," she said without preamble. "Your father used it as collateral for one of the business loans. The bank is foreclosing." This was a shock. My childhood home, the place where my parents had lived for 35 years, had always seemed separate from the business. "How could he put up the house without telling you?" I asked. Mom sighed. "He did tell me. I signed the papers. We never thought it would come to this. The business was always stable before Jake, before Dad's misguided succession plan, before everything fell apart. What does Dad say about this?" "He's not himself," Mom admitted. "He sits in his study all day, barely speaking. This failure has broken something in him, Conrad. I've never seen him like this." Despite my lingering anger, I felt a pang of sympathy. My father's identity had been completely wrapped up in his business, much as mine had been before I was forced to walk away. What about Jake? Has he surfaced? Mom's expression hardened. He came back yesterday. Said he was dealing with some personal issues and needed money. Can you believe it? After everything he's done, he actually expected help. Did Dad give it to him? No. For once, your father stood his ground. Told Jake he needed to face the consequences of his actions. She paused. Jake left angry. Said some terrible things. I nodded. Not surprised. Jake had always lashed out when denied what he wanted. Mom, about the house. Let me look into it. There might be options. Her eyes filled with tears. We don't deserve your help. After how your father treated you. This isn't about Dad, I said firmly. It's about you, and the home you've lived in for decades. After she left, I sat thinking about the complicated tangle of family and business that had defined my life. Despite everything, I couldn't simply walk away from my parents' distress, especially when I had the means to potentially help. The following day, I met with Bill Thompson, the banker who had worked with Mason Construction for years, and who had called me with concerns before the collapse. The situation isn't good, Conrad, he explained after reviewing the loan documents. Your father took out a second mortgage on the house to inject capital into the business about 6 months ago. Given the bankruptcy filing, the bank is moving to protect its interests. What would it take to stop the foreclosure? Bill named a figure that was substantial but not impossible. Are you considering paying it off? I'm considering my options, I replied carefully. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Jake, looking disheveled and anxious, stood on my doorstep. I need your help, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I didn't invite him in. The last time we spoke, you were demanding passwords so you could continue running the company into the ground. He had the decency to look embarrassed. I made some mistakes. Mistakes? You stole from the company to cover gambling debts. You fired experienced employees and replaced them with unqualified friends. You lied to clients. You destroyed a 40-year-old business in a matter of days. Those aren't mistakes, Jake. That's a systematic betrayal. I have a problem, he admitted. Gambling. It got out of control. And now you want what? Money? Forgiveness? I need a job, he said, surprising me. No one will hire me after what happened at Mason. My name is toxic in this town. I studied my brother, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Behind the facade of confidence and charm was a deeply insecure person who had never been held accountable for anything. Dad had enabled his worst tendencies, and now we were all living with the consequences. I can't hire you, Jake. The employees who joined me from Mason would quit on the spot, and frankly, you haven't earned a second chance with me yet. So what am I supposed to do? He asked, a hint of the old entitlement creeping back into his voice. Get help for your gambling addiction. Take responsibility for your actions. Start rebuilding trust with small steps. It's not complicated, but it won't be easy or quick. He left angry and frustrated, but I hoped some of what I said might eventually sink in. Enabling him, as our father had done for years, would only perpetuate the cycle. The next day, I met with my core team to discuss our growing workload. The St. Mary's project was proceeding well, and 3 more former Mason clients had approached us about taking over their projects. We need to expand, Terry observed. But carefully, Sarah nodded. Our current model is working, but we'll need more project managers if we take on these additional contracts. I agreed. Let's prioritize hiring more former Mason employees who are still looking for work. They know our standards and processes. As the meeting wrapped up, Sarah lingered behind. Conrad, have you thought about what happens when we encounter your father and Jake in the industry? It's a small community. It was a question I had been avoiding. Dad is likely done. The bankruptcy and his health issues will probably lead to full retirement. As for Jake, I don't know, but I'm focusing on building something new, not looking back at what was lost. Later that week, I consulted with a lawyer about my parents' house situation. There were options to prevent the foreclosure, but they required financial resources my parents no longer had. I made a decision that was both business and personal. I would help save their home, but with clear conditions attached. I arranged to meet my parents at their house that weekend. Dad looked aged beyond his years, the confident businessman replaced by a subdued, almost meek version of himself. Mom seemed caught between relief at seeing me and anxiety about the conversation to come. I've looked into the situation with the house. I began after declining offers of coffee and snacks. I'm willing to help, but we need to have some honest conversations first. Dad straightened slightly in his chair. What kind of conversations? About what went wrong with Mason Construction. About your decisions regarding succession. About Jake's problems and how they were enabled. About how you valued or didn't value my contributions over the years. Dad started to protest, but Mom placed a hand on his arm. Let's hear him out, Frank. We're in no position to dictate terms. I outlined my proposal. I would pay off the second mortgage, preventing foreclosure. The house would be transferred partly into my name to protect it from future creditors. In exchange, Dad would need to acknowledge his mistakes openly, both to me and to former employees who had lost their livelihoods. This isn't about humiliating you, I explained, seeing his pained expression. It's about honest accountability, something our family has been sorely lacking. To my surprise, Dad nodded slowly. I can do that. I should do that, regardless of the house. It was the first genuine admission that something had been fundamentally wrong in his approach to business and family. A small step, perhaps, but a meaningful one. As I was leaving, Dad asked about my new company. I shared the basics, our focus on management rather than ownership, our sustainable growth model, the team of former Mason employees. You've built something good from the ashes, he said quietly, something that might last. That's the goal, I replied, maybe someday. There could be a place for me, as an advisor or consultant. I still know a few things about construction. The request was tentative, humble even, so unlike the father who had dictated terms throughout my career. I didn't make any promises, but I didn't immediately reject the idea either. Let's focus on getting you healthy first. Then we'll see. As I drove home, I reflected on how dramatically life had changed in just a few weeks. I had lost a company but gained independence. I had been betrayed by family, but built a new professional family of colleagues who genuinely valued my leadership. I had been forced to start over but was now creating something potentially stronger and more sustainable than what had come before. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead with growing a new business, navigating family dynamics, and establishing our reputation independent of the Mason name. But for the first time since walking out of my father's office, I felt truly confident about the path forward. 3 months after Mason Construction's collapse, Cornerstone was thriving beyond my most optimistic projections. We had successfully taken over 4 major projects from the former company. Our team had grown to 35 people, and the St. Mary's Hospital renovation was ahead of schedule and under budget. Our reputation for reliable, transparent project management was spreading throughout the industry. I had been so focused on building the new business that family matters had taken a back seat. My parents' house had been secured, with the papers transferred partially into my name as planned. Dad had followed through on his promise to personally apologize to former employees, a difficult but necessary step in his own recovery. Mom reported that he was slowly regaining his health and spirit, though he remained much humbler than the confident businessman I had known all my life. Jake had disappeared again after our confrontation, and I had deliberately avoided asking about him. Whatever path he was on, it needed to be one of his own making for once. That changed on a warm Friday afternoon, when my assistant informed me that my entire family, Mom, Dad, and Jake, was waiting in our company conference room. They said it's urgent, she added, noting my surprise. I found them sitting awkwardly around the table, an unusual tension in the air. Dad looked nervous, Mom concerned, and Jake uncharacteristically subdued. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing near the door. Dad cleared his throat. "We need to talk, all of us, about the past and the future." I checked my watch. "I have a client meeting in 40 minutes. "This won't take long," Mom assured me. "Please, Conrad. It's important." I sat down cautiously, maintaining emotional distance despite the physical proximity. "I'm listening," Dad began formally, almost as if delivering a prepared statement. "I've spent months thinking about what happened with Mason Construction, about the decisions I made that led to its downfall. I was wrong, Conrad. Wrong about everything," he continued, his voice steady but humble. "I failed to value your contributions appropriately. I showed favoritism toward Jake based on outdated notions and my own ego. I enabled behavior that should have been addressed years ago. And I betrayed your loyalty and hard work in a way that can never be fully repaired." The direct acknowledgement was unexpected. Throughout my life, Frank Mason had rarely admitted error, and never so comprehensively. "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "It means something to hear it stated plainly." Jake spoke next, looking directly at me for the first time. "I have an addiction problem. Gambling. I've been in treatment for the past 2 months. 30 meetings in 30 days, then continued therapy. This was news to me." "That's good, Jake. I hope it's helping. Part of recovery is making amends," he continued. "I can't fix the damage I caused to the company or to the employees who lost their jobs, but I can acknowledge that I used my position to feed my addiction, that I manipulated Dad, and that I treated you with complete disrespect despite your years of hard work." The sincerity in his voice was something I had never heard from my brother before. Recovery had apparently stripped away some of the entitlement and bravado that had defined him for so long. Mom reached for my hand across the table. "We're not here to ask for anything, Conrad. We just felt it was time for honest communication as a family." But Dad shifted uncomfortably, suggesting there was more to this meeting than simple apologies. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked directly. Dad and Jake exchanged glances before Dad spoke again. "There's a legal situation developing from the bankruptcy. The trustee has identified some of the financial transfers Jake made as potentially fraudulent. There could be criminal charges." This was serious. "What kind of charges?" "Embezzlement, fraud, misuse of corporate funds," Jake replied quietly. "My attorney says I could face jail time, and there could be implications for me as well," Dad added. "As the CEO who approved some of the transactions without proper oversight." I sat back, processing this information. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do. I can't make legal problems disappear." "We don't expect that," Mom interjected quickly. "We're just being transparent about the situation." "There's something else," Jake admitted. "I've been offered a deal by the prosecutor. If I cooperate fully, document the gambling addiction and continue treatment, they'll reduce the charges significantly." "That sounds like the best option," I observed. "It is," he agreed. "But part of my recovery is also building a new life, getting honest work, proving that I can be responsible." He paused. "I was hoping you might consider giving me a chance." The request hung in the air between us. Jake, who had taken everything from me months ago, was now asking for employment at the company I had built from the ashes of his destruction. "You can't be serious," I finally said. Dad jumped in. "Not in any management capacity, Conrad. Nothing with financial responsibility. Just entry-level work. A chance for Jake to prove himself from the ground up, the way you did years ago. The way I should have done in the first place," Jake added quietly. I stood up, needing physical distance. "Do you have any idea what you're asking? The people working for me lost their jobs because of your actions, Jake. Many of them had to drain savings, delay retirements, or struggle to make mortgage payments while looking for new positions. How could I possibly bring you into their workplace?" "You're right," Jake acknowledged. It's too much to ask. We understand, Mom said gently. We just wanted to be honest about where things stand. I paced the conference room, conflicted. On one hand, the request seemed outrageously presumptuous. On the other, there was something genuinely different about Jake's demeanor, a humility and accountability I had never seen before. If, and this is a hypothetical if I were to consider this, it would be under extremely strict conditions, I finally said. Minimum wage, most basic labor position, zero special treatment. One strike, and you're out. And you would need to personally apologize to every former Mason employee now working here. Jake nodded seriously. I would accept all of that. I know I have to earn trust back one day at a time. I'm not making any promises, I cautioned. I need to think about it, and I would have to discuss it with my management team. Their opinions matter more than family loyalty at this point. That's fair, Dad said. More than fair, considering everything. As they prepared to leave, Dad lingered behind. Can we speak privately for a moment? When we were alone, he seemed to struggle for words. I didn't say this in front of the others, but I need you to know. I'm proud of you, Conrad. What you've built here in just a few months is remarkable. More impressive than anything I accomplished with Mason Construction. The acknowledgement, so long withheld, landed with unexpected emotional weight. Thank you. That means something, coming from you. I was wrong about leadership, he continued. I confused Jake's charisma with capability, and I undervalued your steady reliability. If I could do it over. His voice trailed off. We can't go back, I said simply. We can only move forward with better understanding. After they left, I gathered Terry and Sarah, my two most trusted colleagues, and shared the content of the family meeting. Terry's response was immediate and emphatic. Absolutely not. That kid destroyed the company we all dedicated years to. How could we possibly trust him? Sarah was more measured. It's a complicated situation. Jake clearly has serious problems. But bringing him here could damage morale and create unnecessary tension. I haven't made any decision, I assured them. I wanted your honest opinions first. That evening, I sat on my balcony, weighing the situation from all angles. The pragmatic business leader in me recognized the risks of bringing Jake into Cornerstone in any capacity. But another part of me understood the importance of second chances and the potential value of helping someone genuinely committed to recovery. After much reflection, I reached a compromise solution. I would not hire Jake directly at Cornerstone, where his presence could undermine the culture we were building. Instead, I would help him secure a position with one of our subcontractors, a flooring company owned by an old friend who understood addiction recovery firsthand. Jake would have his opportunity to rebuild from the ground up, but with appropriate distance from those he had harmed most directly. The next day, I called a family meeting at my parents' house to share my decision. Jake accepted it with genuine gratitude, understanding the reasoning behind the compromise. This is more than I deserve, he acknowledged. I won't let you down. This isn't just about me, I explained. It's about respecting the people who suffered because of past actions while still leaving room for redemption. Everyone deserves a chance to change. Dad, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. You're a better leader than I ever was, Conrad. You've found balance where I only saw extremes. The moment felt like a genuine turning point, not just a resolution of past conflicts, but the beginning of a healthier family dynamic built on honesty, accountability, and appropriate boundaries. As we sat together as a family for the first time in months without hostility or hidden agendas, I realized that sometimes the collapse of one structure is necessary for the building of something stronger and more sustainable in its place. 1 year to the day after walking out of Mason Family Construction, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the newly renovated St. Mary's Hospital, surrounded by hospital administrators, city officials, and the entire team from Cornerstone Construction Management. The completion ceremony marked not just the successful delivery of a $30 million project, but the official establishment of Cornerstone as a major player in the regional construction industry. This project faced unusual challenges from the start. James Wilson, the hospital director, told the gathered crowd. But Conrad Mason and his team delivered exceptional results despite those obstacles. The project finished 2 weeks early and 5% under budget, practically unheard of in healthcare construction. As James handed me the ceremonial key to the building, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the devastating betrayal that had forced me to walk away from my family's company to this moment of professional triumph, the path had been neither straight nor easy. Cornerstone now employed 50 people, including 22 former Mason construction staff who had found a new professional home with us. Our unique business model focusing on construction management rather than direct building, emphasizing transparency and sustainability, and including profit sharing for all employees, had attracted attention throughout the industry. After the ceremony, I mingled with guests on the terrace, accepting congratulations and discussing potential future projects. Among the attendees were my parents, standing somewhat apart from the crowd but clearly proud. Dad looked healthier than he had in months, the stress of the bankruptcy proceedings finally behind him. Mom approached with a warm smile. "This is quite an accomplishment, Conrad. Everyone is singing your praises." "It's been a team effort," I replied honestly. "I couldn't have done this alone." Dad joined us, extending his hand formally. "Congratulations, son. You've built something remarkable here." Coming from him, the acknowledgement meant more than I had expected. Our relationship had slowly evolved over the past year, moving from the bitter aftermath of betrayal toward a more honest, if still careful, connection. He had come to terms with the loss of Mason Construction, focusing instead on his health and on rebuilding family relationships. "How's the consulting going?" I asked. 3 months earlier, I had finally taken Dad up on his earlier request, bringing him in as a limited technical consultant on specific aspects of traditional building methods. The arrangement was working surprisingly well, with Dad respecting boundaries and offering valuable expertise without attempting to control or direct operations. "Enjoyable," he replied. "Different from running the show, but satisfying in its own way. Your team is impressive, Conrad. They respect you in a way my employees never respected me." "Different leadership styles," I acknowledged, without judgment. Mom squeezed my arm gently. "And how is Jake doing at Precision Flooring?" "We don't want to ask him directly and make him feel monitored." "Making steady progress," I reported. "Bill says he shows up early, works hard, and is learning the trade properly. No shortcuts." Jake's journey had been challenging but promising. After starting in the most basic labor position at the flooring subcontractor, he had maintained sobriety, attended regular recovery meetings, and slowly earned incremental trust. He lived modestly in a small apartment, paid weekly restitution toward his gambling debts, and had recently been promoted to apprentice installer, a small step, but a meaningful one. As the celebration continued, Terry approached with a group of employees who had transitioned from Mason to Cornerstone. "We have something for you, Conrad," he said, presenting a framed photograph of our first project team, gathered in front of the hospital when construction began, "to commemorate how far we've come." The gesture touched me deeply. These people had taken a risk, joining my untested venture after experiencing the trauma of their previous company's collapse. Their trust had been the foundation upon which everything else was built. "I should be giving you all gifts," I replied. "Cornerstone exists because of your faith in this vision." Sarah joined the group, champagne glass in hand. "Speaking of vision, should we tell him about the proposal?" Terry nodded enthusiastically. "The management team has been working on something. We want to formalize the employee ownership structure of Cornerstone. True profit sharing with equity stakes based on tenure. This had been a conceptual goal since the company's formation, but hearing that the team had developed a concrete proposal was exciting. It represented exactly the kind of company culture I had hoped to build. Collaborative, merit-based, and fundamentally different from the top-down family dynasty model that had ultimately destroyed Mason Construction. "I'd love to review the proposal," I said sincerely. "That's exactly the direction we should be heading." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself alone on the terrace, looking out over the city lights. James Wilson joined me, leaning against the railing. "You know what impresses me most about what you've built, Conrad?" he asked rhetorically. "It's not just the quality of the work or the business model, though both are excellent. It's that you didn't let bitterness define your path forward." His observation struck a chord. There had certainly been moments of anger and resentment throughout the past year. Times when the unfairness of what had happened threatened to overwhelm me. But ultimately, I had chosen to focus on creation rather than destruction, on building something new rather than mourning what was lost. It wasn't always easy, I admitted. "The best achievements never are," James replied. "By the way, the hospital board is already discussing 2 expansion projects for next year. We won't be soliciting other bids. The job is yours, if you want it." This vote of confidence from our most prestigious client was the final validation of the year's work. We'd be honored to continue the partnership. After James left, I took one final moment alone before heading to the after-party with the team. The night view from the hospital roof offered perspective. I could see the old Mason Construction building in the distance, now occupied by a tech startup, while Cornerstone's modest but growing offices stood just a few blocks away. The contrast was symbolic of the journey itself. Mason Construction had been built on my father's personality and traditional hierarchical values. Its foundation, while impressive in many ways, had contained fatal flaws: favoritism over merit, appearance over substance, control over collaboration. When tested by Jake's irresponsibility and my father's poor judgment, those flaws had caused the entire structure to collapse. Cornerstone, by contrast, was being built on different principles: shared ownership, transparent communication, sustainable growth, and leadership based on demonstrated ability rather than birthright or charm. These foundations were proving stronger and more resilient, capable of supporting not just commercial success, but genuine fulfillment for everyone involved. As I prepared to join my team, I reflected on the painful but ultimately valuable lessons of the past year. True worth comes from what you build, not what you inherit or are given. Leadership is earned through consistent action, not bestowed by title or position. Family relationships, like business partnerships, must be based on mutual respect and clear boundaries to thrive. Sometimes walking away from an unjust situation is not an act of surrender but the first step toward building something better. And perhaps most importantly, the measure of success is not just in financial outcomes or professional achievements, but in creating systems that recognize and reward the contributions of everyone involved. The collapse of Mason Construction had been painful, but necessary. From its ruins had emerged something stronger, more ethical, and ultimately more successful, both as a business and as a model for healthy relationships. What had seemed like an ending had proven to be merely a difficult but essential transition to a better beginning. The next day, standing before our assembled team at Cornerstone's offices, I shared the news about the hospital's future expansion projects and the vote of confidence they represented. The celebration was genuine and collective. Every person in the room had contributed to our success and would share in its rewards. A year ago, many of us faced an uncertain future. When Mason Construction collapsed, I acknowledged. Today, we're stronger than ever, with a growing reputation, a solid financial foundation, and most importantly, a company culture built on respect, collaboration, and shared success. The applause that followed wasn't just for me as the founder, but for what we had all created together. In that moment, I realized that the greatest triumph wasn't just surviving my father's betrayal or proving my value in the marketplace. It was breaking the cycle of unhealthy business practices and building something that could truly last beyond any individual, including myself. Have you ever faced a situation where someone's lack of faith in you became the catalyst for your greatest achievement? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of betrayal, resilience, and rebuilding resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories that show how challenges can become opportunities. And if you know someone who's struggling to find their worth after a betrayal or setback, share this with them as a reminder that sometimes walking away is the first step towards something better. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, your value isn't determined by those who fail to see it.